Hey, this is Eston Walton, and today we have another audiobook review. Today's book is Bloodlines by Will Wight, and the narrator is Travis Baldree. Hopefully that's correct. So this is a fantastic book. It's like the 9th book in the series. All of the books have been pretty fantastic. The size is very reasonable. It's one of those you really just don't want to put down. And I'll get a little bit more into that later. But in summary, overall 4.75. The book itself, 4.62. Narrator was a 5, which is pretty impressive from a narrator perspective. I'm kind of hard on some of my narrators. Okay, so to start off with, let's talk about the book side. So we have Uniqueness. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. Why? So Uniqueness, right now the book is in a genre that I would kind of classify as martial arts, where the main character is always trying to focus on their fighting style, their control of their inner chakra, or whatever the book wants to call it. And so in that sense, that's not unique. That's something is becoming fairly popular. It very much falls right in line with like a literature RPG type style, although this book doesn't really feel quite like that. But there are like some set progressions that people try to go through. But is what makes this unique is where it goes from there. It essentially took the idea, this martial arts idea, and that's like your very first 2 stages, and everything else from there is new. It starts to talk about things that are more like mental in the cognitive world. It talks about past, present, and future, reality, all kinds of things. And so like in that sense, it very kind of takes a pretty strong step outside of just martial arts and perfecting your body. And so that's pretty impressive. And because of that, I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. Like it does have this grounding in a very non-unique genre, but it departs from that fairly quickly. And by book 9, it's like very separate. It still relies on it some, but it is very separate. In all reality, one of the only real knocks in the book is the character development in this particular book. We're coming off of a previous book in which the main character and almost like the secondary main character both have big breakthroughs, and like they spent the whole book getting to this breakthrough, and then the book kind of ends. And so the main characters already grew, and so this book is all about navigating those waters, like what can I do now that I couldn't do before? So there is some growth in that sense. But it almost feels like this book is tying up loose ends. Going back to the past, where did I come from? What are my responsibilities for that? But I just felt a little bit empty at the end. Almost all of these books, the main character makes some really strong work. And in this book, it just didn't feel like that was the main goal, which is fine. That's not a huge issue. But that does dock at a point. I gave it a 4 out of 5 for character development, because it didn't seem like that was the goal of this book. And so moving on to secondary characters, this is where the book shines, I would say. There are several secondary characters that have their own motives, they have their own goals, hopes, dreams, whatever you want to call them. You get to see their character development and growth. In this book, it's all kind of the same in the sense that you're not really seeing a lot of growth from them, but you are seeing their perspectives and how they contribute to the main storyline, but you don't feel like you waste a whole lot of time sitting there. You jump to their point of view when it's relevant, In this book, a lot of the characters are together a lot, so there's not really a need to jump to them, but there are a couple of times where they're separate and you see their perspective, and then you leave and go back to where you belong with the main character. And so 5 out of 5 for secondary characters. The matrix system is also a 5 out of 5. If you're, into book 9 and you're still learning about how things work, and it seems intentional and not just like, oh, well, let's come up with some random way to grow, the system, then you're probably going to get a 5 out of 5 from me. In this book, we dive really deep into some of like the bigger characters. Don't want to say too much, but so some things happening outside the world and some of the really strong characters inside the world. We're finding some of their limitations, what they're capable of, what they're not capable of, and learning a little bit more nuance to some of what the main character's powers are. Like, oh, okay, well, I've become a sage. What does that mean? What does that give me the ability to do? And so, in that sense, it got a 5 out of 5 because we're in book 9 and we're still learning. In a very intentional way, which is fantastic. On to the narration side of things, which for this book it came out pretty fantastic. Got a 5 out of 5 for both categories, but let's start with the dynamic voicing. The narrator, Travis Baldree, I would say is something you would want to look at if you were a narrator and you wanted to improve. Go look at his performance, Travis Baldree, and take notes. He is expressive. He is. You can tell when a character's angry. You can tell when they're sad. You can tell when they're afraid. And the book doesn't have to say it or spell it out to you. You can just feel it by the tone that he uses, the expressiveness, and it's for every character. It's not just for the main character. So for dynamic voicing, there's no way to give him anything but a 5. And one thing that's maybe a little bit unique to him is that he doesn't over-exaggerate either. I've seen some narrators, I'm not going to dock them on it because it's still pretty great, but they are almost too expressive in the sense that it's over and above what is necessarily called for. But that usually adds a little bit of comedy to the book, which is great. And so that adds its own thing. Travis Baldree adds what I feel like is the appropriate amount of expressiveness to each character. And so that's a good reference for any of you narrators that are watching. Then we have a vocal cast, in which each character is very unique. You don't have to be told who it is, you know who it is. We're in book 9 at this stage, and so if you don't know them, then that's kind of your own problem. He's very, it's very obvious who is who, just by the voice that they use, and that's fantastic. I mean, what else do you need to know, right? 5 out of 5. So the narration definitely helped brought the book alive. It makes it more interesting in this sense. It's not just someone reading off the page. As someone who practices this, there's even a blooper reel at the end. I always love that it is funny. It is funny to see where narrators messed up or where they're practicing. But I also feel like it shows that they are practicing, right? It's not just this was one take and done. And so, let's see here, for age rating, we could probably extend it to middle and high school. There's a fair bit of fighting and stuff, but nothing that I would say is gory per se. And there's nothing overtly sexual about this book. And so I would say that you could probably start at middle school, and up. Definitely talk to your parents. Every parent has a different perspective on that, but humor, this book leans towards the humor side, although there are some very serious points. I would say it's more humorous than not, probably just due to I don't know, the sidekick feels like the right term, but the sidekick of the main character is comedic relief. That's he has real purposes, but that's what we love him for. And so romance, slightly. It talks about it, but it doesn't really dive into details on it. And so it's kind of like a chaste romance. You hear about it, but you don't really know what's going on. Maybe some more in future books, but not a lot. It's a martial arts based book, so action, it's going to have tons of action, but not tons of gore. And a new thing that I'm talking about for some of the books is engagement. And I would say this book has high engagement. And the only way I know how to tell you is how easy it is for me to be distracted from the book. Some books I listen to and I'll be scrolling through the internet and I'll be like, oh, what just happened? Let me like roll back 30 seconds or whatever, because I missed it. And in this series, like I don't want to do anything but listen to the book. It's a decent size, and I knocked it out in 2 days, which was probably, too fast to get through one of these books, but it just sucks you in and it doesn't spit you out until it's over. And so I would say this has a high engagement book. And that's it. Just a reminder, overall 4.75, book was 4.62, narrator was a 5. So the book was dropped a little bit by character development. It was brought up by the narrator, who did a great job. But as with all of Will Wright's books that I have listened to, they've all been great. And so it's a definite recommend. Please like and subscribe. Comment if you have any ideas about other things that should be rated. If you have any ideas on how I should rate engagement as a new burgeoning category that I'm thinking about adding. And yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of it. Have a good day.